Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab's free webinar this morning or afternoon. You are currently participating in Workplace Gaslighting in the Nonprofit. Questions are encouraged throughout the webinar. You can type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will be holding all questions until the end because I figured there are going to be a lot of questions today. A little bit about your presenter. Consuelo Mukes, PhD, is a certified coach, consultant, and trainer with over 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, including as a CEO of a nonprofit support center and executive director of a free medical, eye, and dental clinic for the uninsured. Dr. Consuelo teaches doctoral courses in organizational management, is a published author, and served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon, Africa. Thank you so much for taking the time to educate our community today, Consuelo. I will now hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Welcome to all of you this morning for coming to this interesting workshop that we're having on gaslighting in the nonprofit organization. I do want to let you know that at the beginning that the information that is being provided is for education and information purposes only and should not be interpreted as legal advice. And if you are seeking legal advice, please speak to an employment lawyer in your state. As Leo was saying, I have had many years of experience, not only in the nonprofit organizations, but also in profit organizations and teaching and traveling and doing a lot of exciting things. I think one of my most exciting things was Peace Corps volunteer overseas in Cameroon, Africa, and working with a South African team on community conflict transformation. So a lot of experience in working with people that may have been in conflict, a lot of different issues that we are running into today as our world is quickly moving forward. So this topic is something that's come up quite a bit as I've worked with some nonprofit organizations and profit organizations. It's not that it's a totally new concept and idea, but it is rather new in our understanding in the nonprofit organization. So the course goals and objectives for this morning on this workshop are going to be to create an awareness of gaslighting in the nonprofit organization. We want to understand what it is, getting this out of my way, understand what it is and its effects on the targets of the gaslighting. We're going to gain some tools to approach, address, and intervene with such acts when they are present. So your objectives are recognize and understand gaslighting behavior in the nonprofit workplace. You're going to understand forms of workplace gaslighting, how gaslighting affects individuals and the nonprofit organization, and tools to respond to gaslighting or to assist those that are targeted by this behavior. And let's see, I'm trying to get this to move forward. There we go. So let's start with recognizing and understanding gaslighting in the nonprofit organization. The origin of the term gaslighting comes from a 1938 play called Gaslight, and it also has a 1940 and 1944 film adaptation. The story is about a husband who tries to convince his wife and others that she's going crazy by manipulating small elements of their daily lives and insisting that she is mistaken, misremembering things, or just delusional when she points these things out. And one way the abusive husband tries to make his wife doubt her sanity is by slowly dimming the gas lights in their home while pretending nothing has changed. It would be interesting to know if any of you have seen that movie. It is online. I saw it again recently, black and white movie. Very, very interesting and very intriguing the way all of this is done. So you might want to take a look at that and find out what that gaslighting really is originating from. It's primarily found in personal relationships, and this is how it started. But now we're finding these techniques being used in the workplace. We're finding it in media. We're finding it in politics. And sometimes people begin to question what was really said, maybe what wasn't said. And where the concept of gaslighting is becoming more prevalent in our regular society. So gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation and domination. And one of the main goals is to cause a person to doubt their perception of reality and understanding of a situation and to second guess everything that's happening around them. It's also a manipulation of the target's mental state or physical environment. And I just want to clarify as we go through that in this, I'm going to talk about the gaslighter, That's the person or the situation, the group that's actually doing the gaslighting. And I'm calling the person that might be most affected by it the target. So we can really distinguish between the two instead of saying gaslighter and gaslightee. So we have the gaslighter and the target. So another goal is to manipulate the target's mental state or the physical environment. Um, and then look at those changes and tell the person, even in the workplace, that they think they're imagining things or they're wrong, or they just misunderstood what was said to them about an assignment. So it becomes a control mechanism to coerce a person to be overly careful of what they're doing instead of being able to recognize what is being done to them. And gaslighting can happen from a colleague, from an executive director, a CEO, a member of a board. It could be someone outside of your organization, maybe a client that you're working with. Anybody who is involved with some kind of influence or control over the target, and that's what's happening, people wanting to get that control. So as we push ahead, let's first make sure that it's gaslighting. Not everything is going to be gaslighting. And as we begin to recognize these concepts and terms in our society and in our workplaces, it's really important that we do take time to recognize what's really going on so that we just don't become so nervous with each other that everything we do is a problem or everything has a derogatory meaning or concept to it. Sometimes gaslighting or what's happening can be or could be unintentional. And they can say things to you, well, that's not something I want to hear right now. I don't have time to listen to you. Don't you think you're overreacting on something? Those may not be helpful responses to something that you approach or if someone approaches another person with, but they don't always mean the person wants to manipulate you. It could be a one-time event. It could be a response to one specific concept, but it's not a continual or perpetual pattern that's causing the confusion or intentionally wanting to hurt or harm somebody. The gaslighting will develop into a repeated pattern of manipulation. And that's what true gaslighting is. It's something that's going to be happening repeatedly. Again, a one-time shot, sometimes it can be something we would call maybe a microaggression. Somebody might say something that's offensive at that moment. It's not continual. Microaggression is it's not a very different thing. It's somewhat of a different concept that we've talked about in other seminars. But it could be a microaggression that just happens to be said at this time, and the person isn't repeating it or making it into something that they're trying to get control over you. It could be a different opinion. It might be rude or critical, but it isn't necessarily gaslighting. Somebody offers a different opinion about something than you say, and that's okay. I mean, that can happen. Perhaps the way they deliver it is wrong. Maybe it needs to be conversed about, and as opposed to saying, well, somebody said something to me. Now, if it's a person who is a higher position than yourself or a boss, or it could be a donor or someone in the community that might say something. And again, it might be rude, it might sound critical. A lot of us in the nonprofit world might run into this because we do deal with so many personalities, but it isn't necessarily gaslighting. If someone is insisting that you're wrong, I know what I'm talking about, that's generally not gaslighting, just to say it that way, because they aren't trying to manipulate you. It's certainly not polite, but impolite things are not always gaslighting. And again, it's something that's more persistent, and you'll see this as we go along. So one thing to really think about is to be aware of your feelings as this happens, not just the actions of the other person, so that you can trust yourself, trust your instincts, take stock of your feelings, and really understand if this is a continual, persistent behavior that really needs to be looked at and addressed, or it is just something that just happened, or a microaggression that needs to be dealt with maybe in a different manner. So what are some forms of gaslighting in the nonprofit workplace? Gaslighting behaviors are persistent negative narratives or comments that are happening to you on a regular basis. You can see some type of pattern starting to happen in this if you are aware of it. For instance, going back to the original concept, when this husband was working with the wife, and they had gas lights at that time, not the electric lights. He would dim the lights and make the lights go up and tell her that that was impossible. It hadn't happened. He would take things from the room and hide them, and then ask her specifically about that and tell her that she had done something to lose these things. Began to tell people around her that she was losing it. So those were persistent things that made the person begin to doubt herself. So in our behaviors, let's take a look at persistent negative comments about the target or the person that is being focused on, that target's performance, credibility, the product, or the service that the person is delivering. And typically, the negativity is based on personal judgment and biased accusations rather than any facts or validity. And that's an important point too. I mean, where are you coming up with this idea that what I was asked to do has not been done? Or where are you saying that it wasn't done correctly? Or where are you saying I didn't respond to what you asked me to do in a certain way? I don't understand. So a negative thing about different aspects of the person on a consistent basis. Also, persistent negative gossip about the person's professional or personal characteristics. And ongoing negative gossip is also a form of passive aggressiveness. You might hear some gossip in the workplace going on behind your back, or you may not. That's the other thing. In the meanwhile, you're thinking everything is okay when it's at face value. So creating a negative narrative about the professional or personal character of a person. Also having public comments, a persistent negative public comment or publicity in face-to-face, online, individual, group, or other kinds of meetings, in memorandums or reports, performance evaluations, customer client reviews, or other situations. And this is usually based, of course, on falsehoods or exaggerations rather than concrete evidence and facts. And it has the potential to damage the target's professional credibility and personal reputation. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later on some of these things, on how somebody in the workplace would be able to help themselves to be defended by some of these things that are just natural supervision and managerial concepts in the workplace too. Sometimes people that are targets don't know some of these concepts. Sometimes people that are perpetuating some of this behavior don't understand it either. So we're going to chat about that a little bit as we go along. But it's tearing that person down just a little bit as you go. You get an evaluation, you think you're doing well, that you've gotten things done well, and people have this thing, well, I never give more than a 3 when it's a 1 out of 5 because I don't want someone to think that they're getting too good, or I give them a 2 because I don't want, this type of thing that could just be a managerial deficiency, but it has an effect on the person that is getting evaluated. And again, it could damage people's credibility and their reputation if it's done in public. Also, negative humor, sarcasm that's consistent, expressing hostility or condescending statements, and disguising those things as humor. But it's in order to tease or mock or belittle or marginalize the target. And many times, almost always, it's followed by something like, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Don't take things so seriously. So it goes back on you on, well, maybe I did take it too seriously. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe it's just me. And that's where people start to get you at that passive aggressive type of behavior. You also may find some persistent professional exclusion from networking opportunities, professional development, promotion or advancement, or other opportunities. This could be being excluded from board meetings. I've seen it where executive directors or CEOs are excluded from board meetings of the board might call executive meetings, perhaps, and not let the CEO or the ED know. Now, you don't always get invited to an executive meeting, that's true, but that's usually when it's a personnel issue involving the executive director or the CEO. Other than that, most of the time you would be invited to that unless there's something in your bylaws outside of that. However, there are times when people have found that they have been excluded and not even known that a meeting was carried out. Some new strategies or concepts were brought in, and then they were held accountable for not knowing about that. So that's even looking at areas of bullying and intimidation in the workplace. You begin to develop some doubts. You begin to get a little anxious, and it can also go with staff meetings. It can, and I want to be able to see if we can look at all levels of people within the organization. Sometimes people aren't invited to a staff meeting. Oh, you didn't show up for the staff meeting, but you weren't invited. You didn't know it. And beginning to bully people or intimidate them in such a manner as this also. So there might be some type of inequitable treatment compared with other employees, and inequitable in the fact that the other employees may have similar or lesser experience and accomplishments. But all of a sudden, one person is being targeted to do jobs that are beneath their capability or beneath their job description, while others are being given other positions that would put them in a better light over and above the person that should be doing that in order for them to get the promotions and all. So there's a lot of nuances that can go into this too. People many times have to understand what's really going on. I know of a situation once where a young woman had been in an organization, and she was a person of color, had been there quite a while and was able to train others coming in, but told that she didn't represent the face of the organization. And another person who was not a person of color was brought in and put above her for just the reason of ethnicity. Now, of course, there's so many other things that go into that issue also. On top of it, sometimes these types of things are happen and they're not spoken. So now we're looking at a lot of different issues that can go into gaslighting behavior, where the person that is being targeted is actually made to feel it's something wrong with them. There's nothing that they did wrong. This is just something that's normal. So you can see where some confusion can start to come into these types of situations in the workplace. And when questioned about the matter, the gaslighter may misdirect and blame the target for being the cause of their own victimization. You could, it's perhaps there's something, someone saying, well, if you would have done a better job, this wouldn't be a problem. You might get overloaded with so many tasks, you can't get things done, tasks are not evenly distributed. Finding that you get blamed for getting something not done. Maybe you didn't know this was your new task. A lot of little subtle nuances and bullying type of things can happen in there to victimize the target. Now, other gaslighting techniques. Now, one thing I'm trying to do is think of all levels. And when we are in a nonprofit, of course, we have our board, we have our leadership in the nonprofit. It's going to be your executive director or your CEO. You're going to have staff, you have volunteers, you have your donors, you have people in the community that you serve. We have a lot of layers. So it's important to take a look at this at different layers. Personally, I've had a lot of this happen to me in different levels as I've gone through my career. Many of you might be thinking about that also if you're listening to this and kind of recognizing some things that may or may not have happened in the past and saying, well, this is when I was just a staff person, now I'm an executive director or CEO, or I'm on a board. So I want you to think about these in different levels too, and hopefully we can get to some questions and take a look at that. So some gaslighting techniques that actually happen: changing and or canceling scheduled appointments, misplacing files or other documents the target is working on, not giving the person phone messages and claiming that these messages were given and you didn't get back to someone, or you miss an appointment, or you don't serve a client, forgetting to put the target on emails, claiming the person was told verbally, micromanaging by critical coworkers or supervisors to the point that it becomes obstructive, and keeping the target under constant surveillance. And another one is the silent treatment, getting so you don't want to respond to anything If you ask the person something, emails and other inquiries, you just have a silent treatment and you begin to wonder, did I even send this out? Maybe questioning the target's memory, even if the person is sure of what happened. Are you really sure that's what happened? Are you really sure that you didn't miss this on purpose? Being silenced, switching the subject of the conversation, being questioned about the feelings, and again, unable to remember if you had been called to a meeting, or in a meeting, being silenced is not being called upon in a meeting. Everybody else gets called upon. You want to say something. There's never an opportunity for you to add to it. And that's a consistent pattern. Trivializing the feelings and needs are constantly noted as being too sensitive. You're too emotional about the situation with the clients. Just do your job. Maybe you're not provided with necessary supplies to really complete the task, but blamed for not meeting goals. These are gaslighting techniques if they are consistent. Pretending to have forgotten what actually happened, or flat out denying promises made. A personal experience I had years ago was when I was wanting to get into a leadership program in the nonprofit, and was told by my executive director at that time that at least half the tuition would be paid if I were able to get through the process and get into the program. And after I got accepted and the money was due, the head of the organization told me they had never made such a promise. They totally denied it flat out. Now, fortunately, I had an email that I had exchanged with this person saying our exact conversation at that time a couple of months ago, documenting the conversation that she would pay this if I got in. So, she wasn't happy about it, but I was able to get it. But that's because I had some evidence and I had documented it, or I would have been in hot water or have to just drop out of that program. It still became a very uncomfortable situation because I was able to defend something, but at least there was some evidence there. Now, racial gaslighting. Racial gaslighting is becoming much more prevalent in the workplace, especially today. There's so much going on society-wise. There has always been some of this happening. It is not new, so I shouldn't say that it's just going on in the workplace now. Maybe more attention is being brought to it in the workplace now because of what's happening in our society. It describes the ways individuals or institutions try to manipulate or question the sense of reality of a BIPOC, often to assert or maintain control, superiority, or power. And for clarity, I will define that BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So using it in a sentence sounds like an acronym that's not being utilized correctly, but it is becoming a very common acronym this day. So I wanted to put it in here so we would also understand that. You get some of this through tone policing and victim blaming. And tone policing is another concept that you're going to hear quite a bit about. Tone policing is when someone is told how they should have said something. They're told how you should express yourself. And a lot of times this is with a person of color in the workplace or elsewhere that are say, well, you should say it this way, or if you made mention of it like this, then we can understand you. So tone policing, or how you elevate your voice, people telling you, oh, you should have used your inside voice. Some people do speak loudly, some people speak softly. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with what's being said. Then it goes into victim blaming. So when someone discusses racism in general or points out a specific act, they're either told they're overthinking it, or they're wrong or criticized for how they brought the issue up. So it becomes a way of flipping things on people. For instance, somebody has every reason to be angry about racist structures or things that might be happen, how they're portrayed in certain ways. But often this is portrayed as being the angry Black woman or man or angry person of color, and blaming that person as opposed to looking at the situation. Sometimes people are characterized as violent, uninformed, or hostile for calling out racist situations. Sometimes what they're said is just dismissed. And this comes from someone that actually was saying it and expressing that they expressed a concern about something going on and were told, well, I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's probably an isolated incident. I don't think racism exists anymore, really. And that really is a gaslighting situation because you're totally denying the truth of what's happening in society, in people, and all around us when people are saying racism doesn't exist anymore. Now, more research on racial gaslighting could come from Angelique Davis. She's a professor at Seattle University, and her professional partner, Dr. Rose Ernst, who is also a professor who actually came up with the term racial gaslighting and have done a lot of study on this. It's also when a group of people are blamed for a problem rather than the underlying societal cause, which you hear a lot about. Now, it's important to understand that white people can also be racially gaslighted, but when a white person speaks out against racism, white people as a group aren't deemed abnormal or crazy. Sometimes white people will say, well, we have racism also, which, is not true, and it doesn't happen in our society. They may feel attacked in a certain way, but it wouldn't be racism. But people are looked at individually if they say something of a racial nature. But on the other hand, when a person of color is racially gaslighted, their whole race is characterized negatively. And again, that's all of you are angry. All of you have a problem. And that's pretty common. And you're probably seeing that around you also. So racial gaslighting is happening, and it's happening in our nonprofits. And it's important to understand because a lot of people that we serve are people of color. And a lot of times there's some of this gaslighting that might come into our service areas in how people are treated or thought about or how quickly services are delivered. And it might mean going back and taking a look at some of this so you know if you might unintentionally be gaslighting some other people at a level in your nonprofit. Maybe you haven't thought about some of this. It might be intentional, but maybe not understanding that it would get recognized. So something to take a look at. Now, plausible deniability. Another interesting concept you're going to hear a lot about, or you might recognize a lot about in media today or in politics. It's doing something intentionally, yet done in such a way that the aggressor can claim it was not intentional. For example, a person might make a racist comment, but it's so vague, then they can deny that it was a racist comment. Well, you're all obsessed with making everything about race as a response, or well, you simply took it as a racist comment. That's not what I meant. This really is the core of passive aggressiveness and of gaslighting when somebody does this type of thing, smart enough to make it in a way, well, I really didn't say that. There's nothing you can say that I did about that, kind of defending themselves with this idea. And again, you're going to hear a lot about this in media, and you see a lot about it in politics. Plausible deniability also allows the gaslighter to keep the back door open should their argument be directly confronted or challenged. Now, what it means to keep the back door open, it's a concept that means they have a way to escape from taking responsibility for statements or actions that they have done. Commonly, the phrases used would include things like, I didn't mean to do that, it wasn't intentional, it just happened. That's not the reason. You are wrong. So ambiguity is the main thing that keeps plausible deniability going. And other deceptive and confusing techniques that allow the person to keep that back door open, to give them some kind of a way to escape from seeing that they've actually done something. That's another concept to be aware of. When people know that something has happened, you've identified it, that's been called, and well, I did it. Now, in media, it's interesting because there's so much on film, or now people have so many videos out there, and really, thank goodness, there are some videos, especially when there have been some things that have happened in society or things going on, things said, it's been captured either on video or tape. Now, I can't say that you can't videotape things that people don't know about, or you can't tape things. In certain states, you have to know your state laws. People need to know about this, so I'm not advocating any of that, but I'm just saying you will see this thing happening on television and other areas, and that's plausible deniability. So how does gaslighting affect individuals and the nonprofit? It can cause the person that's targeted or the group of people to doubt or second guess oneself, to begin to wonder about your professional credibility or your personal self-worth in the organization. When things that you do are doubted, or you don't show up to meetings, or suddenly everything you've written disappears, or it wasn't really done. I mean, you begin to say, wait a minute, what's going on? You might begin to struggle with decision making. You lose confidence or feel less than as a nonprofit member. In other words, it just starts to chip away at a person. You wonder if the gaslighter is justified in their judgments and accusations, constantly wondering, am I too sensitive? You start to apologize more frequently. You might feel generally unhappy, confused, and not like your usual self. And you might find yourself avoiding others, even personal people at home or whatever, because you just don't know what's happening. You don't know how to explain it. You don't know what's really going on. The effects of being racially gaslit. These are just some quotes from people. Being racially gaslit feels like screaming underwater in a room full of people. It's going on in your head. You know it's happening. You can't say it. It's being denied. Is this, am I really being shunned? Is this, was this really a slight? Was it a microaggression? Was it, these things are going on. And it may not just be in racial gaslighting situations, but others. When you've been discriminated against throughout your entire life, you can recognize it, gaslighting or other instances in an instant. It's like a sixth sense. So when people turn around and ask you to prove your reality, it's truly maddening. So what's the effects on the actual nonprofit? It can create a tense, toxic, unsafe, and unpleasant working atmosphere, not only for the person that's involved, but it can creep into others knowing, because a lot of our nonprofits are very small. So I mean, I don't know how many some of you have. Some can be 3, 4 people in the whole staff. Some can be more than that. Some can be hundreds of people. So it varies. But if it's a small group or a large, and this is happening to one person, you begin to see them withdrawing or other things going on. They begin to doubt. It really can create a very unpleasant working atmosphere. It can create relational drama that causes productivity to suffer because people don't work well together. It can distract coworkers, resulting in an extensive misuse of time and energy. Can cause an increase in sick, stress leave, noticeable reductions in productivity, disengagement following an erosion of trust because you just don't want to deal with the person that's gaslighting you, or people aren't sure about working with others. And it can affect recruitment and onboarding costs due to an increase in employee turnover, because a lot of people end up leaving. Sometimes people do end up leaving because it can get so bad. So it really is extremely detrimental when resulting in an increase of turnover of nonprofit leaders. Hiring an executive director or a CEO and having all your strategic plans and everything having to start over again can cause really serious backlash into the organization. But unfortunately, sometimes these concepts are used, these techniques are used to get rid of someone because they don't want to state it more directly. And again, this can just be really, really bad management. It can be really people not understanding how to work with others in the organization. You have that also, as opposed to being intentional gaslighting. So again, we need to understand what it is. It can increase something called presenteeism, and the reference to Nielsen is in your resources. Presenteeism is when employees suffer from conditions or problems that prevent them from being fully productive at work. You show up, you're there, but you're not fully there. You present yourself, but the pain that you're expressing, or the pain the other person's having, physical pain, mental or emotional, because of these attacks in certain ways, disrupt the concentration. It increases fatigue. It makes you so tired, ultimately resulting in lost productivity. and the employee attempts to show up and engage even when sick or suffering from symptoms rather than trying to disengage. So you find people are showing up. Again, nonprofit people are so dedicated. Many times you want to show up anyway, but you feel tired. You can't think, you can't concentrate. You begin to miss things because of this confusion that's happening, and you're starting to wonder, is it me or something else? So what would be some tools to respond to gaslighting? First of all, the benefits of understanding is that you can understand if this is deliberate or not. And you can targets can begin to protect themselves from continued or future similar behaviors that might be occurring. And you can recognize the specific characteristics of gaslighting to know if this is really what's happening or not. One of the major elements of gaslighting is manipulation. And if the target is made aware of gaslighting, the person becomes empowered to recognize specific characteristics of what the gaslighting looks like and can name these things as such so you can better deal with it. And the target can then protect themselves and point out the manipulation in order to disrupt it and move on. So what would be some ways to address the situation? One of the ways is to recognize it and call out the behavior as appropriate. It wouldn't probably be good to just go in and say, you're gaslighting, but you can go in and think about how much of this is really going on and what can I do to stop it? So something that I would suggest is to ask for details on situations. For instance, if somebody is telling you you didn't do something, the work wasn't done, ask for specifics. What exactly are you saying wasn't done? Let's get some things down in writing and start writing things down. Solidify things, solidify dates, confirm plans, send an email confirming the conversation, CC others on the emails as possible. Again, I gave the example of having someone tell me they were going to help me take care of something and then later denying it. I had learned early to, after you have a conversation with someone, summarize briefly that conversation. Enjoyed speaking with you this afternoon. We stated that this is what is going to be the goal, due in 3 days. This is what I'm working on, and this is where you're going to help me, or this is what we're going to do in the future. Put that in writing in an email, just exactly what it was, and send it thanking the person for the conversation. Then you have it in writing. That's one way to deal with some of this information, and that you're looking for the details and you're taking control of verifying what actually has happened. Let's see, distancing yourself from the gaslighter if possible. Now, say this is a person in the community that you're working with, or it's a volunteer or a donor. If you don't need to work with that person, you can maybe get away. Again, our nonprofits sometimes are small. If it's someone that you have to work with, that is a different situation. But if you can distance yourself from the person, get away from the situation. And again, document the things that are happening. And I do want to emphasize, when you document things, document it in a way that you're not doing it on the equipment that you use in the office. Remember, the nonprofit equipment can be taken at any time. You want to put it maybe written and keep that off premises. And just you're making notes to yourself. You can put it on your computer when you get home maybe and type it, or just make some notes of this is what happened. I always kept a calendar, a physical calendar, and wrote my notes on it and carried that with me if need be. So consider how to protect yourself in that manner. Develop a support system of people that might be looking at the situation. Ask them, am I imagining this? Is this what you saw happen? Were we in this meeting together? Did you get a notice for the meeting? Find ways to find out what really went on. And also do self-affirmation to know what you were thinking and feeling is reality. And again, learn to trust yourself. Just learn to trust yourself and learn to know what's going on. I want to give another example. There was an employee, actually, and this one was a leadership position. She found out that some of the staff had been getting together and fabricating information and delivering it to the board, accusing the executive director of not doing things correctly, harassing clients, They were the person being rude to volunteers, walking through the area with a bad attitude. It happened to be the executive director was a person of color, first one that had been hired. That was one situation. The person also was somebody that they didn't want there. So the board started to get suspicious. They said, this is a totally different personality of this person that we hired. We've known the person for quite a while. And fortunately, one of the board members did approach that person and say, this is what we're receiving, and revealed what was happening behind that person's back, which was a thing of gaslighting and manipulation for a derogatory reason of wanting to get that person out of there. So because there was some honesty and some conversation in there, they were able to alleviate the situation, and some of the people actually doing it from the staff were let go, and the thing was resolved. This can happen another way also. You can sometimes have a leader who is not handling the staff well and also gaslighting the staff. So depending on what's going on, again, documentation can be very helpful. Get support, talk to your board, talk to your executive director, depending on your chain of command, your line of command. Usually that's kind of fluid in a nonprofit. Let someone else know, depending on how it's happening. Again, document, keep the documentation off premises if it gets serious. Seek professional assistance if needed. And again, I'm not giving you any legal advice or HR advice, but if you have an HR expert, many times there are nonprofit support centers in your area or your state. Contact them for help. There might be nonprofit human resource experts that you can call up, or organizations in many states. These are available, or they are available nationally to talk to. And again, you can approach the person themselves. You can approach the gaslighter alone or with support. And depending on the severity, you have to determine your next steps. Is this something that is so bad that it can't be changed? Is it affecting you personally? Is it affecting you professionally? You have to see what's really going on with this and how serious it actually is. The role of the board and the executive director or CEO in the nonprofit, they have the responsibility to maintain a safe workplace for the employees, volunteers, clients, the public, etc. So the board should understand what is going on, or the executive director, if it's something outside of that group. I mean, it might be involved with that group, but hopefully you can either go to your executive director about it, or you can go to a board member. And you should know in your employee handbook how you approach issues. The board and the ED should create and maintain updated grievance policies for reporting bad behaviors for all levels of the nonprofit. So when things are happening, you should be able to go to your employee manual and find out what you can do to protect yourself. Also to contact professional assistance for advice or further actions. And again, the board and the executive director can talk to their insurance agents. It's interesting, a lot of people don't think about that. But if there's any liability that comes against the nonprofit, you would go to your insurance company for some protection on that. So that's usually a source that might be able to get you some other information on bad behaviors in the workplace. Again, an HR specialist, human resources specialist, the state employment agency, the employment development department in some states, or other agencies in your state, or legal assistance in your state, depending on what your laws are. If you just want to check and see about this, you may find out it's not what you're thinking. It might be a matter of you sitting down and talking with the person, or having a general meeting together, or it might be something more. The board and executive directors can provide training on workplace diversity, equity, and inclusiveness issues, which a lot of this brings up, and provide professional development opportunities as needed. Now, what if you decide to actually speak to the situation and get some responses? There are several ways that it could be responded to, but one thing about it is sometimes communicating is the best way to do it. You may not always want to communicate alone. You might want to do with somebody else, but just understanding what's happening. And again, let's go back to the fact that it may or may not be intentional. It may just be bad management. It may be someone has been in a position of leadership. They don't know how to lead. So some things can be happening. And honestly, some people are doing this unaware where other people are not. So you want to understand the situation and probably go to the person with support. And hopefully the gaslighter themselves can have a couple of reactions. One of them would be hopefully to honor and to validate the target's experiences of the situation, because the target will be seeing this in one way and the gaslighter could be seeing it in another. So hopefully that person will honor it and validate it. They can identify and acknowledge the behavior if it's intentional or not. If it was intentional, they probably are not going to say it, but if it was unintentional, they will probably mention that. Or it could be plausible deniability. I didn't mean this, but it's being called now. Hopefully you have some evidence there, or you have noticed some of the pattern, and you can mention what's happened on this occasion, this, or you can bring in your calendar, show you had things calendared. Somehow it got missed, and so now we're going to take some new actions of making sure it's calendared. So that person needs to recognize what they are doing too. The person can learn about implicit bias in similar issues. We all need to know about implicit bias. Implicit bias, we all have biases, no matter who we are. We grow up, we prefer one thing over the other. Some people have bias towards other people. That's what happens. Some people have racist concepts about people or sexist concepts about people and other biases, depending on who people are. And so there needs to be training on this, and people need to recognize it. And again, this can get into even deeper issues, and maybe the professional training to change behavior is needed. So these are all areas that can go deeper into this. And again, this is just like a first level look at some of this, because it could get deep, or hopefully you can be able to handle it by just having a good conversation. So possible consequences of speaking up is to be realistic about possible outcomes. Not everyone has a protection of someone else to assist them in the organization. So if you're an ally and you want to go and talk on someone's behalf, that's great also. But always think about how the approach is. Think about the outcomes that could happen to the person that is actually the target of this. Be aware that others might not believe or understand the issue. Some people have never been in a situation where they have not been the person of privilege, and they lack the experience or the knowledge of different grounds of gaslighting or discrimination, or they lack understanding how what they do or say to others treats people. That is definitely not an excuse. It's never okay to cause somebody harm or in any manner. And the people need to work towards understanding, having empathy, how to listen inclusively, and be better in the workplace. But some people are not aware of what's going on. And you have to consider how the target could be affected by speaking up. Also, could the person who is actually gaslighted and speaks up about it, again, it's a manipulation concept. Could it be brought back on that person? So do you have yourself actually protected before going in? Can you? How far has this gone? Again, it would take much further study and understanding. The best case scenario, of course, is that positive change occurs. I would just throw in there that perhaps some form of mediation might be able to happen in the workplace for some of this also to help out. But again, this would take a further look. So this information has been for your education and information purposes, and isn't legal advice, HR advice, and is some general information in gaslighting, which is a very deep situation. And if you are seeking legal advice, I do ask you to speak to an employment lawyer in your state. I hope that we have a few minutes for questions or comments. That was a lot of material. I see we've gone over time. How are we doing for that?
Great. Thank you so much, Consuelo. I really appreciate you packing so much material into a pretty short amount of time. That's all the time we have for today. We, again, will be sending out the recording and the slides within about an hour. So thank you again for taking the time to attend our workshop. And thank you again, Consuelo, for educating our community today. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Goodbye.